So picture this scenario. You're sitting at your desk,
Okay.
and your inbox is it's constantly pinging, right?
Oh, the absolute worst sound.
Yeah, it's pinging with like 3 different urgent requests. Your calendar looks like a solid block of color with 0 breathing room.
Just wall to wall.
Exactly. And you are staring down the barrel of an impending, massive, multi-tiered project. You just feel completely paralyzingly overwhelmed.
The cognitive load there is just crushing.
It really is. And in that specific moment, you don't just want a coworker to offer, vague help like, let me know if you need anything.
Right, because that's just more work for you.
Exactly. You find yourself intensely wishing that someone could just read your mind, like intuitively figure out exactly what needs to be done without you having to formulate a single sentence to explain it.
Just silently step in and execute the work.
Yes. But, I mean, what if that feeling, that absolute visceral inability to delegate when you're drowning in tasks, what if that isn't a character flaw?
Because we're so conditioned to think it is, right?
Yeah, totally. We think it's a failure of management or like a sign that we lack discipline. But what if it's actually a fundamental difference in how a specific brain is wired at a biological level?
And that underlying question is really the foundation of what we're unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Yes, welcome. Today's deep dive is based on this truly fascinating first-hand written account.
Yeah, from a professional who manages highly complex corporate events.
And this text, it's extraordinary because it just refuses to stay in one lane.
It really does. It's so layered.
It begins as this incredibly intimate, granular look at navigating a rigid corporate environment with neurodivergence.
Oh.
But then,
And it evolves into something much larger.
yeah, it uncovers these hidden, almost invisible psychological complexities of how humans actually work together as a team.
And then takes a massive, completely unexpected pivot.
Oh, huge pivot. The author eventually lands on a deeply philosophical and honestly quite radical defense of artificial intelligence.
Which perfectly captures the intersection of cognitive diversity and modern technology.
It really forces us to strip away our assumptions, like asking what it really means to collaborate, what our brains are actually optimized for.
And how technology might be stepping into deeply intimate cognitive roles that we never historically anticipated.
Right. So I want to start right at the genesis of this workplace setup. Because the author, this event manager, does something right out of the gate that requires an immense amount of vulnerability.
They're remarkably open.
Yeah, they openly acknowledge their neurodivergence to their boss. They don't try to mask it or, just power through it.
Which is what most people try to do.
Exactly. Instead, they proactively ask for a specific, customized accommodation. They ask for a support person for their event management tasks, and they specifically use the term running mate.
The terminology there is so critical to understanding their mindset.
Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it in a political context. A running mate is a partner. It implies a shared journey.
Like they're on the same ticket.
Exactly. A complementary dynamic where both people are in the race together, bearing the loads simultaneously. It completely subverts the traditional hierarchical delegation of tasks.
Right, where a manager just hands work down to a subordinate.
Right. The level of self-awareness required to not only recognize your structural limitations, but to have the professional maturity to ask for that exact scaffolding, it's incredibly rare.
And we should really look at how management responds here, because it is not a standard HR playbook move.
Not at all.
The author notes that their most understanding peer, the managing director, steps up and structures a very specific, bespoke 3-person team for them every time a project launches.
It's this intentional triangle.
Yeah. There's the author, a designated quote-unquote leader, and a third colleague who handles similar fieldwork.
If we look at this through the lens of systems engineering, the managing director is building in redundancy.
Redundancy. How do you mean?
Well, instead of forcing a neurodivergent employee to conform to a standard linear 2-person dynamic, which usually involves a lot of friction and miscommunication, they are creating an ecosystem.
Okay, I see.
By adding a third person who handles similar fieldwork, they're creating a buffer. It disperses the cognitive load so that if one node in the network gets overwhelmed, the system doesn't immediately collapse.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right.
To put that into like a physical context, it reminds me of a relay race, but with very specific parameters.
A relay race is a great analogy.
Right, because the author is incredibly self-reflective about their strengths.
Yeah.
They explicitly state they are phenomenal at initiating,
getting the project off the starting block.
Yes, they are the starting runner who explodes off the line with this raw creative force to get the event conceptualized. They aren't intimidated by the blank page.
And, the blank page is often where neurodivergent brains thrive.
Really? Why is that?
Because it requires divergent, non-linear thinking, brainstorming, ideating. That's the fun part. The struggle isn't generating the momentum, it's maintaining it.
Exactly.
Well,
The struggle is sustaining it through the mundane structural phases of the project.
which is exactly why they need this specific team dynamic. As they sprint down the track with this initial burst of planning, they explicitly require a setup where the baton pass doesn't demand complex, unspoken coordination.
Right.
At the start of a project, the other two team members are basically just CC'd on emails. The author's running alone, generating the initial mass of the project.
But getting off the starting block is only half the battle.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned the designated leader waiting for that baton. That dynamic between the author and the leader is where the traditional corporate playbook gets thrown completely out the window.
Oh, it really does. Logically, you would assume the managing director put the designated leader there to provide exactly what the author lacks.
Yeah, in a textbook scenario, if you have an employee who is great at initiating but struggles with executive function, you pair them with a highly organized, meticulous project manager.
Someone who thrives on structure, timelines, and oversight. You pair the visionary with the operator. It's the classic dynamic. But this is wild. The author observes that this designated leader has a strange nature.
A very strange nature.
They write that they can only conclude the leader possesses the exact same neurodivergent traits as they do.
Which is wild.
Right. The leader is poor at planning. They are prone to forgetting promises. And they are chronically overly optimistic about the team's capabilities and the project's timelines.
The irony of that pairing is profound. I mean, from a standard human resources perspective, putting two individuals together who both struggle with planning, organization, and time blindness.
It seems like you are engineering an absolute disaster.
It defies every known convention of complementary team building.
I have to challenge the managing director's strategy here, because on paper, that it looks like a massive failure of management.
What's deeply negligent.
Did they just look at two employees who operate a bit outside the norm and lazily group them together? Because assigning a leader who can't actually plan to oversee an employee who struggles with executive function seems incredibly irresponsible.
It really does.
But then, the author explicitly notes feeling a very strong sense of affinity or familiarity with this leader. So is there a hidden genius in pairing two people whose brains work the exact same way?
Well, that affinity is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting in this relationship. We really need to consider the concept of masking here.
Masking, like
Okay.
hiding your traits.
Exactly. For neurodivergent individuals, constantly having to translate your thought process, hide your chaotic methods, and present a sanitized neurotypical workflow to your colleagues, it is utterly exhausting.
It's like having a second full-time job.
Exactly. It drains the cognitive battery before the actual work even begins. By pairing them together, the managing director may have created a space of profound psychological safety.
Oh, I see.
The author doesn't have to explain their non-linear process to the leader, and the leader doesn't judge the author's chaotic output because they share the same internal operating system.
They speak the same internal language. They don't have to waste energy translating their methods. They can just exist in their shared chaos.
Precisely. However, your skepticism about the liability of this pairing is entirely valid.
Because, psychological safety is wonderful, but a shared chaotic process is still fundamentally chaotic.
Right. Empathy and affinity do not automatically organize an Excel spreadsheet or secure a venue.
No, they definitely don't.
So we have to look at what happens when you stress test a pairing that relies entirely on affinity rather than complementary skills.
And the source material provides a brutal stress test.
Oh, it really does.
The author details a logistical nightmare of a timeline. 3 massive corporate events crammed into 2 weeks.
Which is just, it's unheard of.
If you've ever worked in event management, just hearing that sequence is enough to induce a panic attack.
It requires an extraordinary level of sustained executive function.
Beyond just sustained function, it requires navigating highly complex cultural logistics. So first, they have to arrange everything for a Golden Week event.
And for context, Golden Week in Japan isn't just a holiday.
Right, it's a cluster of national holidays where the entire country's infrastructure, travel, and business operations shift dramatically. So securing logistics during that window is incredibly fraught.
It's basically a blackout period for normal business.
Exactly. And immediately after that, they have to gather attendees and prepare all the documents for a post-Golden Week study group.
Simultaneously.
Yes, and handle the prep, execution, and stakeholder negotiations for a subsequent two-day event.
And we must remember the division of labor we established earlier.
Right. The author initiated the momentum.
Yes. But despite the leader technically being present and giving some initial vague instructions, the author notes that as the days tick down to these three massive events, they are the only one actually doing the hands-on granular work.
So the leader has essentially faded into the background.
Yes, completely.
The starting runner is still running, but the track just turned into a marathon, and no one is taking the baton.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And this is where the operational friction really catches fire. The text highlights a fascinating clash in corporate communication cultures that takes the author's baseline stress and multiplies it exponentially.
Yes, the author describes a very specific bottleneck regarding how information flows. They point out that traditional Japanese corporate culture strongly favors having a single, unified point of contact.
Right, a single window for all communications.
Exactly. This is a deliberate cultural design meant to streamline consensus building and provide a unified front to the client.
It's all about harmony and avoiding crossed wires. But the author is managing an event that involves overseas clients.
And the Western overseas corporate culture operates on a completely different frequency.
Totally different. If an overseas client has a highly technical question about the event content, they don't care about a unified front or a single window.
No, they want the fastest answer possible.
Right, so they bypass the management structure and go directly to the individual who is visibly in charge of the work. They contact the author directly.
Which completely shatters the team's intended protective structure.
It breaks the ecosystem.
Exactly. The author was grateful for the three-person triangle because it was supposed to disperse the load. But functionally, because the author is the visible node doing the work, every single communication vector is pointing directly at them.
They become a forced router for all information.
Yes. If a client asks a question, the author can't just answer it. They have to adhere to the internal culture by relaying the question to the leader, waiting for the leader's input, synthesizing that input, and then replying to the client.
It adds a full, agonizing layer of administrative bureaucracy to every single interaction.
Let's look at the mechanics of what that actually does to a neurodivergent brain.
Yeah, let's break that down. Think about a computer's RAM, its short-term working memory.
Okay, good analogy.
A neurotypical brain might operate like a machine with a massive amount of RAM. You can have 20 tabs open. You can receive an incoming email, mentally sort it, put it in a queue, and then return to your primary task without losing your train of thought.
You have a linear processing system that handles interruptions gracefully. The brain can partition the tasks.
Right. But for someone grappling with executive dysfunction, their internal RAM architecture is fundamentally different.
Very different.
They might possess incredible processing power, like a high-end graphics card, for one specific hyper-focused task.
Yeah.
But they have very little working RAM for sorting incoming chaotic data.
Right, they can't jumble the tabs.
Exactly. So the author is utilizing all their cognitive power to hyper-focus on building the architecture for these three events. But every single time a new message pierces that bubble, an overseas client asking a question, or a directive coming down from the leader, it doesn't just go into a queue, it literally overwrites the author's internal priorities.
The concept of an overwrite is a brilliant articulation of the physiological cost of context switching.
It really is.
It is not merely an interruption, it is a total catastrophic reset of their cognitive workspace.
A total wipe.
Every time the author is forced to act as a router, the mental house of cards they were building collapses. The author explicitly describes their progress becoming scattered, the master plan disintegrating, because their internal priority queue is constantly being scrambled by these external inputs.
So they're trying to rebuild that house of cards over and over again. And every 5 minutes, someone opens a window and the wind knocks it down.
Exactly.
They're completely isolated in the actual execution of the work. Their cognitive RAM is constantly being wiped. They are staring down the barrel of Golden Week logistics, a study group, and a 2-day event, and they are heading straight for a brick wall at 100 miles an hour.
They capture that feeling of impending doom perfectly. They use the word checkmated.
Checkmated. Wow.
There are no more moves left on the board. The traditional management structure has evaporated, their personal executive function has entirely maxed out, and the events are looming. Stalemate.
So the author is paralyzed. The system is broken. What breaks the stalemate? Because right at the absolute breaking point, something inexplicable happens.
This is where the story shifts from a chronicle of workplace stress into something almost cinematic.
It really does. This is the precise moment where the pairing of two neurodivergent individuals suddenly flips from being a logistical liability into a highly specialized, almost miraculous asset.
It's fascinating.
The author writes that just as they accept they are checkmated, the leader who, remember, has been practically absent from the day-to-day grind and possesses zero planning skills, naturally fades in.
Disappears.
Without being prompted by a frantic email, without needing a formal status meeting or a briefing document to get caught up, the leader just steps into the fray. And they effortlessly take over the single most anxiety-inducing task on the entire board.
Negotiating with the most difficult stakeholders.
Yes. How does that happen?
Well, the language the author uses to describe this is crucial. They don't attribute this to good management training or a sudden burst of professional responsibility.
Right.
They refer to it as an unconscious intervention. The author states that this intervention is so advanced, so purely instinctual, that it cannot even be learned by observing it from the outside.
You could not write a corporate training manual on how to execute this rescue.
Absolutely not.
So if it isn't a learned management skill, what are we actually looking at here? I mean, how does a leader who fundamentally cannot plan suddenly execute a flawless, high-stakes negotiation rescue out of thin air?
The author concludes, and this aligns perfectly with neurobiological frameworks regarding ADHD and similar profiles, that this is the leader's hyperfocus activating.
Hyperfocus?
Yes. For a listener who might not be deeply familiar with the term, hyperfocus is a hallmark trait of many neurodivergent profiles.
It's when you just dial in completely, right?
Exactly. It is the phenomenon where a brain that struggles immensely to engage with mundane planning, routine administrative tasks, or mild stimulation suddenly activates with absolute laser-like precision and boundless energy when a crisis hits.
It's as if their brain physically requires the adrenaline of a 5-alarm fire just to trigger the sprinklers. If the fire isn't hot enough, the system stays dormant.
Biologically, that is a very accurate metaphor. We are talking about dopamine and norepinephrine regulation.
Right, it's the neurotransmitters.
Routine, day-to-day tasks simply do not provide enough neurotransmitter stimulation to engage the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part of the brain responsible for executive functions like planning and initiation,
Yes.
right?
So the brain feels understimulated, so it wanders or shuts down. But an impending disaster, a high-stakes negotiation with difficult stakeholders when the entire team is checkmated.
That's a massive rush.
Exactly. That scenario triggers a massive, sudden surge of neurotransmitters. The leader's brain suddenly locks in, completely tunes out all peripheral noise, and solves the complex puzzle effortlessly because it is finally receiving the chemical fuel it requires to operate.
I mean, I understand the biology of it, but I have to push back on the reality of living like that. Let's look at the physical and emotional toll this takes.
It's immense.
Is this actually a sustainable way to operate a business or a life? Relying on an adrenaline-fueled last-minute rescue mission sounds absolutely terrifying. You are essentially living in a constant state of induced cardiac arrest just to get your work done.
From an external neurotypical perspective, it is the definition of unsustainable.
Yeah.
It violates every known principle of steady, predictable project management. It causes immense, radiating stress for everyone involved leading up to the intervention, because to the outside observer, it looks like nothing is happening until the very last second.
It is a high-wire act without a net.
But does it work for the specific pairing? That is the paradox.
Does it?
For this specific bespoke team, it is the exact missing puzzle piece. The author possesses the initiating energy to build the foundation, but their executive function collapses when forced to finalize complex, stressful external communications under intense pressure.
Right.
The leader lacks the sustained attention to build that foundation, but possesses the crisis-activated hyperfocus to land the plane when the engines fail. It is a terrifying way to fly, but they consistently land the plane.
They land the plane, but the sheer terror of that descent highlights a really painful reality for the author.
It really exposes a vulnerability.
Yeah, this miraculous rescue by the leader points directly to the core vulnerability the author has been grappling with. It leads to the most vulnerable and revealing confession in the entire source text.
Yes, the author identifies this specific vulnerability as their missing screw.
The missing screw. The author confesses that the piece of their brain that is fundamentally biologically absent is the ability to formally delegate or request help.
which is so hard for people to grasp.
It is. They write that the hardest, most impossible skill for an ideal supporter to have is the ability to look at an author who physically cannot formulate instructions, intuitively grasp exactly what needs to be done, execute it, and handle the external communications on their behalf without ever asking for a brief.
This is a profound, incredibly articulate description of severe executive dysfunction. To fully appreciate this, we need to examine the neurotypical reaction the author anticipates, because the author is very aware of how this sounds to the outside world.
They know it sounds bad.
They explicitly state that if a quote-unquote regular person read this desire for a mind-reading assistant, their immediate reaction would be deeply judgmental.
Oh, absolutely. The immediate societal response would be, don't be spoiled. You cannot expect people to just do your work for you without even having the decency to brief them on what you need.
Use your words.
Yeah.
You want me to read your mind? It sounds inherently entitled.
Yes.
And if we look at it objectively, our entire modern society functions on the baseline expectation of basic professional communication. If you are overwhelmed and want help, you must articulate that need.
Right. If you require a task completed, you are responsible for defining the parameters of that task. That is the social contract of the workplace.
But applying that social contract completely ignores the biological reality of what is happening in the author's brain during a state of overwhelm. It treats delegation as a simple choice rather than a complex cognitive function.
Exactly. It assumes everyone has the same mental toolbox.
For someone experiencing severe executive dysfunction, translating an abstract, crushing feeling of overwhelm into a concrete, step-by-step brief is not merely difficult, it actually requires significantly more cognitive energy than just gritting their teeth and doing the task themselves.
Wow.
To successfully delegate, you have to engage in incredibly high-level executive sequencing. You have to mentally map out the entire scope of the project, break that massive abstract blob down into modular, actionable pieces, sequence those pieces in chronological order, and then verbally or textually explain that entire architecture to another human being, all while simultaneously anticipating and answering their clarifying questions.
Let me try to synthesize that with an analogy because it completely reframes the concept of delegation.
I'd love to hear it.
Imagine you are drowning in the middle of a freezing ocean. Your muscles are giving out, you are swallowing water, you are in full panic mode. A lifeguard swims out to you, but instead of just throwing you a life preserver and pulling you in, they tread water next to you, pull out a waterproof clipboard, and say, okay, before I can assist you, I need you to draw a schematic of the boat you fell off of, explain the sequence of events that led to you falling, and write a brief summary on the exact mechanics of how you are currently treading water so I know best how to pull you.
That is a phenomenally accurate representation of the barrier.
Right. In that moment of crisis, asking for help requires more energy than drowning.
Yes. When you view it through that lens, it completely reframes the author's struggle. This inability to delegate is not born out of laziness. It is not an employee being spoiled or refusing to adhere to protocol.
It is a structural neurological barrier.
The bridge in the brain that connects "I am overwhelmingly drowning" to "here are the 3 sequential tasks you can do to assist me" simply does not exist.
Which perfectly explains why that unconscious intervention from the leader felt like pure magic to the author.
Exactly.
The leader didn't swim out with a clipboard. They saw the drowning, intuited the crisis, bypassed the brief, grabbed the author, and swam to shore.
But let's bring a reality check to this.
Yeah, we have to. Finding a human being capable of that level of silent intuition, a colleague who will consistently step in and do the hardest parts of your job without resenting you for not giving them a proper briefing, is incredibly, vanishingly rare.
Almost mythical.
The author even touches on medical interventions.
Yeah.
They mention taking medication, but they note that medication doesn't cure this structural difference. It doesn't magically build that missing bridge.
Because psychiatric medication is a tool, not a cure-all.
Right.
Stimulants or other medications might help with baseline focus, emotional regulation, or reducing hyperactivity, but a pill cannot instantly teach a brain how to perform complex executive sequencing if those neural pathways have never naturally developed.
It's not a magic wand.
Medication might give you the energy to tread water longer, but it doesn't manifest the blueprint for the boat.
That's a great way to put it. So if human colleagues fundamentally cannot be relied upon to read minds without eventually burning out or getting resentful, and medication isn't a silver bullet that teaches you how to delegate, where does the author turn for support?
This is the juncture where the source text completely surprised me.
Oh, me too. It makes a pivot that I did not see coming at all.
It is a brilliant, entirely unexpected leap of logic.
The text transitions away from this deeply personal, intimate narrative about neurodivergent workplace dynamics
Yeah.
and launches into a full-throated defense of artificial intelligence.
Yes, the AI pivot.
The author concludes that because human mind readers are virtually non-existent, the single entity currently best equipped to anticipate needs, process chaotic information, and bridge this massive cognitive gap is AI.
The author explicitly describes artificial intelligence as the ultimate buddy, specifically designed to compensate for the exact executive functions they feel they lack.
We really need to contrast this with how AI is currently being marketed and discussed in the cultural zeitgeist.
Because the contrast is stark.
Right now, the dominant narrative around AI is purely rooted in mass productivity and capitalism. It's pitched as a hyper-efficient engine. Write marketing emails 10 times faster. Generate code in seconds. It's all about maximizing output and reducing labor costs.
But the author is looking at this technology through an entirely different, incredibly intimate lens.
Yeah.
They are not framing AI as a corporate productivity hack to squeeze more value out of an employee. They are framing it as a highly personalized cognitive prosthetic.
An accessibility accommodation.
Exactly. Think about the fundamental architecture of large language models. Their primary strength is processing messy, unstructured, chaotic data, recognizing underlying patterns, and synthesizing that chaos into a highly structured linear format.
Which is the exact executive function the author's brain struggles to perform.
Precisely. And crucially, the AI operates without ego or judgment.
That is so key.
It doesn't get frustrated if your initial prompt is poorly worded, emotionally fraught, or completely disorganized. It doesn't sigh, cross its arms, and say, "Don't be spoiled, give me a better brief before I help you."
Right, it doesn't have HR complaints.
It patiently accepts whatever fragmented, panicked thoughts you throw at it. It intuits the intent, and it fills in the blanks. It builds the bridge that the brain couldn't.
I am fascinated by this concept of AI as a cognitive prosthetic. Let's look at the mechanics of that by comparing it to the tools we've relied on for the past 30 years.
Okay, sure.
Think about standard legacy software, like a complex Excel spreadsheet or a traditional database. That older software acts like a rigid, unforgiving boss.
Very rigid.
It only executes exactly what you command it to do. If you miss a single comma in a massive formula, or if your syntax is slightly off, the software throws an error code, shuts down, and absolutely refuses to work until you provide perfect input.
Legacy software demands perfect executive function from the user in order to generate output. The human has to adapt to the machine's rigid logic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But modern generative AI flips that dynamic. It acts remarkably like that miraculous leader from the author's event crunch.
I see the connection.
You don't need perfect syntax. You can feed the AI an absolute brain dump. You can type, "Hey, I have 3 massive events. One is Golden Week. Overseas people are bypassing my manager and yelling at me. My RAM is full and I have no idea what to do next."
A total panic prompt.
Yeah. And the AI steps in, interprets that emotional, messy input, organizes the chaos, and calmly responds. Okay, based on your timeline, here are the 3 specific emails you need to send today. Here is a polite template to redirect the overseas clients, and here is a timeline for the rest of the week.
It performs the silent, unconscious intervention.
Yes.
It acts as an external prefrontal cortex. It performs the sequencing, the prioritizing, and the structuring that the author's internal biology cannot. It is profound application of cutting-edge technology to solve a very specific, deeply human biological limitation.
It's revolutionary when you view it as an accessibility tool. But, and we have to address this, framing AI as a prosthetic flies directly in the face of the prevailing cultural narrative right now.
Oh, the backlash is real?
The backlash against AI is immense, and people are genuinely terrified of what it means for human intellect. And this brings us to the author's response to that fear, where they unleash a pretty fiery critique of modern research and public commentary.
The author specifically takes aim at the growing chorus of researchers, sociologists, and commentators who confidently claim that people who heavily use AI will experience a severe decline in brain function.
To put it in the vernacular of the internet, they are attacking the narrative that AI will inevitably make us stupid.
The doom narrative.
Yeah, the idea that intelligence is a use it or lose it proposition. Like, if you let the computer do the thinking for you, you will literally forget how to think.
Correct. The author aggressively pushes back on this, arguing that the researchers pushing the specific doom narrative lack vision and have a very short intellectual shelf life.
A short shelf life, wow.
The author believes that instead of fear-mongering about cognitive decline, the scientific community should be urgently researching how to activate entirely new, unused areas of the human brain now that AI is capable of handling routine cognitive processing.
Let's contextualize this panic, because whenever a new technology emerges, it feels unprecedented. But is it?
Not at all.
Can we look at the historical context for this technology makes a stupid argument? Because I severely doubt this is the first time humanity has panicked about outsourcing our brain power.
You are absolutely right. It is a recurring historical panic. This exact argument surfaces whenever humanity invents a tool that externalizes a cognitive function.
Give me an example.
We can trace this fear all the way back to ancient Greece. In Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates famously and passionately argued against the widespread adoption of writing.
Wait, let me process that. One of the greatest philosophical minds in human history hated the concept of writing things down. He thought books would make people stupid.
He believed it would destroy memory, which at the time was synonymous with intellect. Oral storytellers could memorize days' worth of epic poetry. Writing outsourced that memory. He argued that if people started writing things down on parchment, they would rely on external marks rather than their own internal memory capacity.
That's wild.
And as a result, their souls would become forgetful, and they would possess only the appearance of wisdom, not true wisdom.
So using a notepad is cheating.
Exactly. And we see the exact same panic cycle centuries later with mathematics.
Oh, I bet.
In the 1970s, when pocket calculators started appearing in classrooms to replace slide rules and manual computation, there was a massive outcry from educators. The argument was that if students didn't have to perform long division or complex trigonometry by hand, their fundamental mathematical reasoning would atrophy, and a generation would lose its numerical literacy.
The classic, you won't always have a calculator in your pocket argument. Which, spoiler alert, we do.
We do. And more recently, we heard the exact same rhetoric regarding the internet and search engines, the idea that Google is destroying our ability to retain facts and critically analyze information because the answer is always a click away.
So the AI makes us stupid argument is quite literally just the latest verse in a song we've been singing for thousands of years.
It really is.
But I want to hold the author accountable for a moment and push back on their premise. Because we have to consider the source. Is it possible that the author is just heavily rationalizing their own reliance on AI?
It's a fair question.
They explicitly admitted they struggled deeply with these executive tasks. Are they just projecting a grand philosophical defense to make themselves feel better about using a technological crutch to survive their workday?
It is entirely plausible that there is an element of personal rationalization occurring. When you are grounding and you finally find a tool that consistently acts as a life raft and alleviates a lifelong struggle, you are naturally going to defend that tool with immense passion and perhaps elevate it to a philosophical ideal. However, the historical pattern we just discussed strongly suggests they are also tapping into a much larger truth about human evolution and tool use.
How so?
We do not consider modern humans stupid because we can no longer memorize the entire Iliad like oral storytellers did, or because we use calculators instead of doing long division on paper. We simply reallocated the cognitive energy that used to go toward rote memorization and manual calculation toward higher-level problem-solving, abstract reasoning, and systemic innovation.
We traded the burden of rote memorization for the power of complex synthesis.
Exactly.
We externalized the lower-level processing so we could climb higher up the cognitive ladder. I can see the validity in that. But even if the author is partially rationalizing, the place they land conceptually is stunning.
It really is.
They take this pervasive fear of becoming stupid and ask a really dangerous, radical question. What is actually wrong with that?
This is where the text transcends practical workplace advice and enters the realm of genuine philosophy.
Society places an incredibly high premium on intelligence, sharpness, and constant mental agility. To look at the prospect of becoming stupid and openly embrace it feels entirely countercultural. Feels like surrender.
It feels like surrender until you understand how the author redefines the concept.
Right.
For the author, letting AI take over these grueling executive tasks and becoming stupid simply means that the pressure is off. It means there is now a vast, empty space in your head.
And where there is empty space, there is room to grow.
Yes. They specifically address white-collar workers, people who spend 40 hours a week grinding through the exact same executive functions, writing the same variations of emails, mapping out the same logistics, and who have completely plateaued in their personal and professional learning.
For those workers, having AI offload their tasks is not a threat. It is the ultimate gift.
The author describes this gift using a brilliant phrase. They call it being given free storage in your brain.
Free storage, I love that.
Instead of being cynical and wringing our hands over potential cognitive decline, we should be looking at this massive new block of extra capacity and asking, what can I do with this? How can I use this reclaimed space to become better or to finally do different things?
The absolute brilliance of this paradigm shift cannot be overstated. By offloading the cognitive heavy lifting, whether that is the painful structural inability to delegate that the neurodivergent author experiences, or just the mundane, draining task of structuring a diplomatic professional email for a neurotypical worker, the brain's cache is cleared.
It challenges us to completely rethink the prevailing metaphor we use for the human mind.
Let's unpack that metaphor shift. How does the doom narrative view the brain, and how does the author view it?
Well, the traditional doom narrative views the brain essentially as a muscle.
Okay, like lifting weights.
Right. The underlying logic is physiological. If you don't continually subject a muscle to resistance and strain, it will atrophy. Therefore, if you don't use your brain to manually write emails and sequence tasks, your cognitive muscles will weaken and you will become fundamentally less capable. Use it or lose it.
But the author rejects the muscle metaphor entirely.
Yes. The author suggests we view the brain not as a muscle that requires constant repetitive strain to maintain health, but rather as a hard drive.
Like a computer.
Think about how a computer operates. When a hard drive is 99% full of operating system files, temporary data, bloated applications, and cached clutter.
Which, in our human analogy, equates to the constant background stress of delegation.
Yes. The friction of workplace communication, the anxiety of remembering disjointed tasks, and the exhaustion of masking.
When it's full of all that, the computer runs incredibly slowly. It lags.
It crashes unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Most importantly, it completely lacks the capacity to install or process new, complex software.
The RAM is full.
Yeah,
The system is choking on its own background processes.
Precisely. What the author is eloquently arguing is that utilizing AI to handle those structural executive tasks is the psychological equivalent of successfully defragmenting your hard drive and moving all your heavy archived files to the cloud.
You haven't lost the computer. You haven't made the machine weaker.
No.
You have suddenly, miraculously freed up 50% of your total storage space. The machine immediately runs faster. It operates cooler.
Yeah.
And it can now run entirely new, far more complex programs that it literally never had the capacity to handle before.
I want to bring this concept directly back to you, the listener.
Yeah, let's make it personal.
Think deeply about your own job right now, today. Think about the specific friction points that drain you.
The delicate emails you stare at for 20 minutes, endlessly tweaking the phrasing to ensure you sound professional but not demanding.
The complex travel logistics you have to map out across 3 time zones.
The immense emotional energy it takes to figure out how to ask a stressed colleague for help without sounding like you're shifting your burden onto them.
If an AI could act as your perfectly empathetic, non-judgmental buddy and handle all of that friction flawlessly, what would you actually do with that newly freed up mental storage?
That is the pivotal question. Would you finally have the bandwidth to learn a new high-level skill?
Would you possess the creative energy to tackle that passion project you've been putting off for years because you're always too drained?
Or, perhaps most profoundly, would you simply have the capacity to go home at the end of the day, walk through the door, and actually be present with your family instead of being cognitively bankrupt and staring blankly at a wall?
That is the real, tangible gift the author is pointing toward. It is not about capitalism's demand to do more of the same grueling work at a faster pace.
No. It is about reclaiming the physical space inside your own head. It is about achieving cognitive freedom.
And achieving that freedom forces us to reconsider the very definition of human intelligence in the modern age. If a machine can effortlessly handle the structuring, the planning, the sequencing, and the communicating, then human intelligence can no longer be exclusively defined or measured by those specific metrics. We have to find a new metric for human value.
We're getting to the end of our time here, and the journey this source text took us on is genuinely wild.
It's been incredible.
We started with such a grounded scenario, an event planner feeling the crushing weight of a packed schedule. and it opened a door into the hidden world of a bespoke, three-person neurodivergent team.
We examine the profound irony and the hidden psychological safety of a mirror image leader.
We looked at how their shared struggles and mutual lack of traditional planning skills actually created the exact environment needed for that miraculous hyper-focused intervention when the team was completely checkmated by overseas communication cultures.
We explored the deeply painful reality of the missing screw.
That biological barrier, where translating overwhelm into a delegated task requires more energy than actually drowning.
And then we followed the author through that massive pivot.
Moving past the limitations of human empathy and the shortcomings of medication, to see artificial intelligence not as a dystopian threat, but as the ultimate non-judgmental running mate that provides us with the gift of free cognitive storage.
It truly serves as a masterclass in reframing our perceived limitations. It challenges us to stop viewing our cognitive differences as failures and to start embracing the emerging tools that allow us to externalize our struggle and move past them.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you to leave the listener with a final thought to ponder. Something that builds on the foundation of everything we've discussed today, but pushes it just a little bit further out onto the horizon.
Well, if we fully accept the author's underlying premise, that AI is rapidly evolving to become the ultimate translator for our cognitive blind spots, seamlessly bridging the gap between a chaotic, brilliant idea and a structured, linear execution, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental, destabilizing question about the future of human labor.
Okay, lay it on us.
For the entire duration of the industrial and information ages, corporate value has heavily prioritized and financially rewarded those individuals who can organize, structure, and communicate tasks effectively. The operators and the managers have held the power. But if AI entirely commodifies that organization, will the future of work flip completely upside down?
What would that look like?
In a world where execution is essentially free, will society strictly value the raw, chaotic, divergent creativity of our initial ideas? That pure, unrefined initiating phase that our neurodivergent author was so naturally, effortlessly gifted at.
Wow. If the machine can perfectly handle the how, then the only thing left that truly matters is the what. That is a brilliant and incredibly hopeful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I encourage you to spend some time thinking about your own missing screws this week. Stop beating yourself up for the things your brain simply isn't wired to do, and start thinking about what kind of buddy, whether that's a deeply empathetic human running mate who shares your chaos, or a brilliantly defragmenting AI, might help you unlock your own extra mental storage. Until next time.